Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Getting In, a College Coach Conversation. I'm Sally Ganga from College Coach. So do you worry that you need to have your major all figured out before applying to college, but maybe you like too many subjects to narrow it down? Or maybe like me, you really like history, but everybody tells you you can't do anything with history and you'll end up destitute with no job. Anyway, the second and third segments will be for you. I'll be talking with my colleagues Becky Lightling and Karen Spencer about whether applying undecided really is fine and how students choose majors that they haven't been exposed to in high school. But first, I'll be talking with my colleague Jan Combs about why you might need to fill out the CSS profile for financial aid. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Sally.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course, happy to be here and talk about financial aid forms.
And I have to say, as we were talking right before this, I get a lot of questions about this. I mean, parents are understandably super stressed out, right? Or students sometimes when the parents are like, this is on you and you have to do this, in which case I'm like, well, your parents have to give their information. So, and they're like, why one more form? Why isn't the FAFSA enough? Why do colleges keep asking? So let's start with kind of the, the basics. What is this thing anyway?
Right. What is this thing called the CSS profile? And I'm glad you mentioned FAFSA, just to kind of reiterate for folks that is the main financial aid form that all colleges use and will need. And then there's a small subset of colleges that also require a second form, and that's this CSS profile form. And that's used at just under 200 colleges in the country. They tend to be highly selective private colleges with a selection of selective big public institutions as well. So just under 200. So really a small subset, about 5% of all the colleges that are out there. But if they require it and you're looking for your student to receive need-based grant funding from the college, and in some cases scholarship dollars, they need to complete it along with the FAFSA. So it's not in place of FAFSA, but it's in addition to at a small subset of colleges.
So why do families complete it? So we know that a very tiny subset require it, but why do they require it?
Sure. So there's actually a lot of reasons why they may require it. And one is that what I just mentioned, the biggest reason is if you want your student to be eligible for need-based financial aid funds, they need the CSS profile that captures additional financial information about the family to help those colleges make their very best decisions when awarding need-based grant funds. So that's probably the biggest reason. In addition, there's definitely some colleges out there that, even though we know that for merit scholarships, typically it's based on your student, right? Your student's academic performance or profile or talents. But at some colleges out there, and I have to say, I see more and more colleges kind of adding this into their mix. For some of their merit scholarships, they may have a need component, or they're simply requiring the financial aid applications to be submitted. So it's not just about need-based aid. It could be related to scholarships as well. So that's something to have top of mind. I do encourage families just to kind of consider completing it. You can use a net price calculator on the college website to see if there's a chance of receiving need-based aid. If so, you definitely want to complete it. Do thorough research on the college websites to see if they need it for scholarships, because if they do, obviously that's a big reason. And then think about the fact that what if your financial situation ever changed, right? The financial aid office can't help you if they don't have your financial aid forms on file. So those are some main reasons. And there's one more. Well, there's actually two more that I'll point out. Another is there's some colleges that have a policy that if you don't complete the financial aid applications in year one, and I'm not going to call them out, but it does exist, that they won't consider the student for aid in future years, even if their financial situation changes. So personally, I don't think it's a nice policy, but it's done at some schools. So that's another thing to read up on their website. Is it a school that has that policy? And then, of course, real quick, there's some scholarship entities out there, private donors that also may require the CSS profile. And their names are listed on the list of institutions that require it. So those are some pretty good reasons, right?
Yeah, no, I think you definitely, listen, I worked at, I think all three of the institutions I worked at required it. Reed College,
Yep.
Whittier College, and University of Chicago. And Whittier
Mhm.
was, I love Whittier, but it accepted over 50% of those who applied. So it wasn't even one of these hyper selective institutions. I
Right.
don't know if it still requires it. I want to be
Right.
really clear. But I will just say that at Reed, one time one of our transfer students didn't complete the CSS profile, and his mother called me up to say, why didn't he get aid? And I said, well, he didn't complete the aid form. And she said, well, the folks at University of Florida said he didn't need it. And I said, why would you
Oh,
pay attention to what someone at University of Florida said when
right.
he was applying to Reed? I don't like, I mean, it was such a
Right.
bizarre, and so unfortunately he didn't get aid in his first year. I mean, I told her she
Right.
could wait a year, but there was no way to give him aid. So, and we probably would have otherwise, like we didn't fund all transfers, but we funded some of them, and he was a strong student. So, you
And,
know,
and I'm going to jump in if I can real quick to say that I'm glad you shared that story, right?
mhm.
Because University of Florida doesn't require it, right? But many
Exactly.
schools do. So you want to go right to the source. And the CSS profile application and all of related information is housed by the College Board. This is another College Board product. So it's at cssprofile.collegeboard.org. That's where you access the application, and that's where you also access the list of participating institutions. So you very quickly can click on that list once you're out on the College Board site, and you'll see in alpha order the different institutions that require it, as well as any scholarship entities that require it as well. So quick glance at that tells you
Hmm.
exactly the schools that your child might need it for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, don't miss this one. I felt so bad for this woman, but frankly, there was no way around it.
Right.
So,
Yep.
so what are the components why did the colleges ask for this? Like, what kinds of questions do they ask that the FAFSA doesn't capture?
Right. So a lot of the questions are very similar in nature. So it seems very repetitive at first because it's going to be similar information to FAFSA, tax data from the base year tax return, as well as some asset information, family size, things of that nature. Where it's very different from FAFSA is the CSS profile will also ask for information related to the primary home that you live in. So if you own your primary residence, it will ask for information related to that: year of purchase, value, mortgage amount, things like that, where FAFSA simply doesn't ask about the primary residence. That's the one of the bigger pieces. CSS Profile also will collect information about expenses, which is actually a good thing. It
Hmm.
will ask the family if they have private school education expenses, out of pocket medical, if the parents have their own educational debt, so things like that. It will ask for those types of expenses where FAFSA does not.
Hmm.
It will also ask for more in-depth information related to parental assets. It's going to go a step further. It does collect information about, say, 401k balances, and other retirement funds. It doesn't run those amounts through the formula, but it's anecdotal information that they do collect. So it's a deeper dive into
Hmm.
family finances for sure. The other thing that the CSS does allow you to do is there's a special circumstances section at the end, and it allows you to provide additional information to those schools via the CSS profile if you have extenuating circumstances. It's like 2,000 characters, so plenty of room to write your story. If you have extenuating circumstances that you want to document and share, the CSS profile allows you to do that. Whereby FAFSA, you would have to write a separate letter and send it to the financial aid office if you wanted to provide additional information.
Yeah, I had a fellow student whose parents were taking care of both her grandparents on her
Mm-hmm.
father's side,
Yep.
and the expenses were enormous and far beyond what the social benefits paid for.
Exactly. Elder care is a perfect example of an extenuating circumstance. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I guess if you don't mind, I'll just put a plug in based on the
Please.
fact that this episode will be airing right before October 1st, which is when both FAFSA and the CSS profile will launch for the upcoming 23-24 academic year.
Mm-hmm.
So for those listeners who have current seniors, have October 1 kind of top of mind, both for FAFSA and CSS profile if your student's applying to a school that requires it. They'll both be
Mm-hmm.
available. Don't feel like you need to do it on the first. Don't put that pressure on yourself. But I encourage people to try to really focus on it and complete it in the month of October. And that way, you're meeting all the different deadlines that are out there.
Mhm. Yeah, and I want to emphasize that too. I mean, another thing that's important is meeting deadlines. Also, at some of the schools I worked at, is even if you were a few days late, in some cases that jeopardized your aid.
Absolutely. Priority filing deadlines are there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say try to do it in October,
Mm-hmm.
because schools may, 10 different schools on your students list might have 10 different deadlines. So if you just try to get it in early, in the month of October, likely you'll be meeting all of those deadlines that are out there. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. I
definitely.
do want to also say that just because they gather information doesn't mean all the colleges use it. Like you mentioned, home equity. I worked at a college that used the CSS profile that did not look though at home equity. I mean, I don't know, maybe they
Yes.
would have if the house was like a crazy mansion, right? Like they might have looked at it for kind of that broader story. But if you lived in San Francisco and you had a very expensive house, but for San Francisco, it was normal, it was going to be understood that actually wasn't something that you could use as a liquid asset very quickly and easily.
Right, that's a good point that the CSS profile is going to ask for a lot of questions. I remember doing it for both of my oldest
Mhm,
children, and some of the questions were even, what kind of car do you drive?
mhm,
And the same for my students, and of course, all the home equity information. And different schools will use the information in different ways, right? The formulas, fairly standard from looking at income and assets, but not all schools are going to consider home equity. Not some schools will cap the amount of the home equity. So there's different ways that schools will use it. So that is a good point.
mhm,
So you have to complete it, but just know that until your student gets into the college and they review the data and give you back that financial aid award letter, then at that point you'll know exactly what you'll get.
mhm. I
Yeah.
guess I'm going to put in a one last plug too. I talk to parents who I feel like they're a little paranoid. Like they're like, I don't want the government to know more and about my information. Like when it comes to filling out these forms, they get sort of freaked out and I'm like, well, if you submit your taxes, the government already
Yeah.
knows this is going to the schools. I
Yes.
said, and I can promise you nobody's selling this information. Like it's really financial aid officers are not out there trying to make a quick buck. Believe me, they're in the wrong profession if they are, so just look at this more as a way to give them the information needed so that they can hopefully help your student attend college.
Yeah, agree. If you think that you need help paying for college, regardless of what process your student is going through from
Mm-hmm,
the admissions perspective, if you need funding for college, if your student is looking for a discount, then this is just a necessary part of it. Completing the
mm-hmm,
FAFSA for every school and the CSS profile for the schools that use it. If you don't complete it, you can't get help.
mm-hmm,
That's my best message is to complete it if you need assistance and to
mm-hmm.
try to meet those really important deadlines.
Yeah, I mean,
The
giving the information is better than more loans than might otherwise have to take out,
Yeah,
for
I mean,
example.
anytime you can get a discount, why not? So
Mm-hmm,
completing both of these forms is an important part of that process. And, to your point, Sally, we file our taxes very much so oftentimes online, right, for
right.
the IRS site,
Mm-hmm,
or even if you're mailing it in, someone else is hand entering it at the IRS. So the information is online. It's just kind of part of it. I completely understand people's concerns about
mm-hmm,
security and privacy. But these two financial aid forms, FAFSA and CSS Profile, are important pieces of the process, just
mm-hmm,
like the student's admissions application is. It's all very important pieces of the process, and they align together and they're done really simultaneously. So,
mm-hmm,
yeah,
mm-hmm, absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jan.
you're welcome. Good luck to all the families out there. Remember October 1st.
Yeah, October 1st, definitely. All right, so now we'll take a short break, and when we return, I'll be talking with Karen Spencer and Becky Lightling of College Coach.